Hi people, today's project is a Shimpo RK2 potter's wheel. Variable speed, reversible. The problem that we had with it was that it was bought used and it had a little bearing noise, and then we had flood water come up in the basement and some more water got into the bearings and it locked up, rust, what have you. I think the original problem was too much clay building up in the pan as whoever owned it before was working with it. And this is the spindle set that goes in here, and it gets driven by a belt. The pan goes on top, and then the wheel goes on over there. Now, if you let too much clay build up in the edge of this pan as you're throwing, some of the clay can end up working its way back into the center of the pan. Now, let me show you. It can get back into the center of the pan. Now, there is a little cover that goes over this top bearing, and if the clay can get back into this area here, it can work its way down into the seal and destroy the bearing. So try it if you're working with clay, which you would be if you were using a machine like this. Try not to let too much of it build up in the tray as you're throwing, because you can destroy your machine. Trying to get some of that out of there. Now, there was a good bit of rust underneath where the pan bolts in, so I sanded that off and put a little paint there that I had left over. Now, I already have the new bearings in this spindle. It's not too hard to get this apart. You first have to take the assembly out of the bottom, take the belt off, take the pulley off. You can get the bottom of the spindle down to its basic part, and then it will fit out through the hole, and then take this off. The hardest part I had was getting the head itself off, because the set screw was missing and it was rusted fast to the shaft, so it took me a little effort to get that off of there. But once you can get that off of there, you can get the bolts out, get the pan off. 2 bolts hold the pan, 2 bolts hold it to the housing. Get all that apart, take all the bolts out, take this out. There's a snap ring on here. Pry that apart with your snap ring pliers, pull the snap ring off, and I put it on a stand out in the shop that held this up in the air, and I put a small diameter rod on here and just tapped it out through. It wasn't a real hard press fit. The bottom bearing will come out with this with the rest of the shaft, and then take a punch, drive this roll pin out through the other side. Then you can set this on top of a piece of pipe without this plate on it. This will be gone. Take the hub for the pulley off. The bottom bearing can come off. There's a couple of washers in here that act as springs. They're wavy washers to hold the bottom bearing from moving around. And then just reverse the process. Put the new bearing on, put the pulley hub on, slide that back in, put the new bearing in, put the C-clip on there, give it a couple taps to snug everything in, and then we can put this all back together, which is what I'm going to do today. get everything back in its place. And then this is a little cap that just sits on here. Keeps some of the clay out, but like I said, if you have too much clay in there, it's going to work its way in there and that bearing is going to be destroyed. We'll follow up as I get this together a little closer. Okay, just to add this in here, this is probably not the most orthodox way of doing this, but being that this was underwater, I'm kind of skeptical on the condition of the bearings and the motor itself. So I took my 1/16 drill bit and I drilled a little vent hole in the end of the bearing cap here, and I shot some silicone spray in to dry it out. And I'm going to take my grease needle and pump a little grease into this bearing here in the end of the motor to hopefully prolong its life a little bit. And now I have it upside down. I'm going to put the pulley back on, put the belt back on, get the motor back in place, and flip it back over and put the pan and the wheel back on, and it should be all done. We'll see how it is when it's all together. Something else that you need to take notice of if you're working on a wheel like this is the drive